I came here in a time machine that you invented.
Time travel, it's a funny old game, isn't it? First you travel back in time and the next thing you know, parts of you are disappearing before your very eyes, assuming of course that they don't go first. One summer comedy went from being another in a line of teen-focused comedies filling multiplexes at the time to a cultural phenomenon, albeit one that has fueled many midlife crisis automobile purchases.
Honey, I won the DeLorean on eBay. Honey.
I finally invent something that works!
Back to the Future.
When this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're gonna see some serious shit.
In 1985, time travel had still been a relatively untapped genre in movies. Up to that point, there had been some movies about time travel, but most seemed to be variations on H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. Television explored time travel a little more, but movies just tended to stay away from the subject. As far as studios were concerned, time travel movies rarely made much money. Back to the Future would change that by virtue of being funny, heartfelt, well-made, and of course incredibly successful. But it goes beyond topping the box office in 1985.
What happens to us in the future? What, do we become assholes or something?
Unlike a lot of really big hit movies, Back to the Future's stature has only increased over time, to the point where it's one of the biggest franchises ever, even without a new entry in decades.
Please excuse the crudity of this model. I didn't have time to build it to scale or to paint it.
We won't dwell on the plot, since chances are you have seen Back to the Future at least once or 20 twice.
No McFly ever amounted to anything in the history of Hill Valley.
In 1985, 17-year-old Marty McFly has a put-upon geek of a father and a mother who spent too much time drowning her sorrows. His best friend is the eccentric scientist Dr. Emmett Brown, and late one night, Doc Brown shows off his latest invention.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
One thing leads to another, and the Doc is killed by gunmen. Marty escapes in the DeLorean and ends up in 1955 without the power to get home.
Safe and sound now, back in good old 1955.
1955?
He accidentally meets his parents and then hits up the 1955 version of Doc Brown to help him get home.
Who's president of the United States in 1985?
Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan? The actor?
There's going to be just enough power to send the time machine back to the future if they can time things to coincide with a known lightning strike on the clock tower. Look, getting stuck in the past doesn't always sound like it's a terrible fate until you realize you're going to have to sit on all of those movie spoilers for decades. Oh, and there's the whole keep quiet about your knowledge of future events lest you change your own future and possibly even disappear from existence. Marty, of course, learns this lesson way too late, and now he's going to have to undo the bit where he got in the way of his parents' first meeting.
Another one of these damn kids jumped in front of my car!
The thing is, his mother Lorean has the hots for Marty, and as a result, she will never kiss George McFly, meaning Marty will disappear from history faster than all of my high school report cards that my parents mysteriously never got to see. The local bully, Biff, is the spoiler, where he tries it on with Lorean. It takes George McFly finally standing up for himself to get things back on track. If only George and Lorean would kiss on the dance floor, Marty might not end up disappearing from history. Note to my parents, those report cards are not coming back. You're going to need to open an X-file to find those things.
He's an idiot.
What started off as another teen-focused comedy ended up being the biggest film of the year. It would launch Michael J.Fox as a movie star and kick off Robert Zemeckis' fascination with using technology to make movies.
Biff, what's that?
Back to the Future would become one of those franchises that people would love almost unconditionally. It is the definition of catching lightning in a bottle.
If we could somehow harness this lightning.
And they pretty much managed it twice more with a pair of sequels.
Look at my birthday, for crying out loud. I haven't even been born yet.
However, Back to the Future was not an easy production, with more problems than that guy in front of you in line at the post office looking to pay an enormous tax bill with a sack of pennies.
What are you looking at, butthead?
Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale had met at the University of Southern California's film school, and together they started writing and pitching scripts to whoever. An early sale for the pair was the story for an episode of the horror comedy series Kolchak the Night Stalker, about a headless motorcyclist. Zemeckis had impressed Steven Spielberg with a student film, and as an executive producer, Spielberg would help Zemeckis and Gale get their films made. I Wanna Hold Your Hand and Used Cars didn't set the box office on fire, and after a rebuke from the local fire marshal, the films also didn't make much money either. In 1979, the pair also wrote one of Steven Spielberg's rare commercial and critical duds, 1941.
I will not have guns in this house.
Bob Gale had been visiting his parents and saw his father's yearbook, and he'd wondered if he would have been friends with his father if they'd been in high school at the same time. The two Bobs, Bob Z and Bob G, kicked around the idea and eventually worked out the premise that would become Back to the Future. While used cars didn't do great business, Columbia liked the pair enough to look at any other ideas that they'd had. After some tinkering with their original script, Columbia backed out, saying that they wanted more raunchy teen comedies. The only boob in Back to the Future was George McFly. The Air Bob and Bobs had worked with Steven Spielberg 3 times so far, with 3 failures, and despite Steven Spielberg's enthusiasm for the Back to the Future script, the double Bobs were reluctant to lean on their friendship with the Uber director in case a 4th project together also bombed. However, no studios were interested in Back to the Future. Robert Zemeckis was getting desperate and so took on whatever directing work came his way, which turned out to be Romancing the Stone, a film that turned into one of the biggest movies of 1984.
Man, I thought you drowned! I did!
Robert Zemeckis now had a hit film under his belt, so he and Bob Gale went back to Steven Spielberg and asked if he was still interested in doing Back to the Future with them. I guess you know the answer. But Steven Spielberg's company, Amblin, set up Back to the Future at Universal. While the picture was greenlit, it did have to be completed for a summer 1985 release. Production swung into gear, looking for a town to film in, somewhere they could stand in for Hill Valley in 1985 as well as 1955. Practicality saw the production instead take over the backlot at Universal Studios for the square in the centre of the town. The production could more easily control conditions on the lot, as well as being much easier to redress to show 30 years of changes. Smaller interiors were shot on sound stages, while the climactic dance was filmed in a church hall.
I almost forgot to bring extra plutonium. How did I ever expect to get back? One pellet, one trip.
Gale and Zemeckis had been tweaking and refining the script for around 5 years, and things would change along the way.
What did I just say?
When you watch and rewatch Back to the Future, you'll see just how meticulous the Bobs were in making sure that everything was set up.
Pretty mediocre photographic fakery. They cut off your mother's hair.
The family photo with Marty's siblings slowly disappearing is there to increase the jeopardy. Marty plays guitar in the climax, so we see him being able to play guitar earlier in the film. He basically invents the skateboard, so we see him skateboarding in 1985. Early on, the time machine was a chamber, and at one point it was a refrigerator. Turning the time machine into a car was a practical thing, though of course it might suck for anybody in Hill Valley who rented out their flatbed truck.
Black past Maple, that's John F. Kennedy Drive.
Who the hell is John F. Kennedy?
The original ending involved getting the power to return Marty from an atomic test. That would have been A, complicated to shoot, B, expensive to shoot, C, radioactive. For this sort of film, that was the wrong kind of warm glow.
What? You're George McFly.
Crispin Glover as George McFly was the definition of a geek with dreams but not enough drive. Glover was somebody who really got into his character, though perhaps his process wasn't always compatible with the movie-making process. Glover and Zemeckis would occasionally argue on set about how to block scenes. George McFly was a dreamer and a physical manifestation of an oil leak. Drip, drip, drip.
George McFly, I'm your density.
Lea Thompson also had to play old and young with Lorean McFly. Older Lorean is very prim and proper, and has also turned day drinking into a 24-hour event. Young Lorean is also thirsty Lorean, someone who falls for a young man who is in fact her yet-to-be-born son. Because she's so infatuated with Marty, she ignores George McFly for most of the film, leading to Marty's play to pretend to try it on with her, so that George could be a hero. Except Lorean is not going to put up a struggle.
Marty, you look so familiar to me. Do I know your mother?
Yeah, I think maybe you do.
The whole, incest bit was a bit on the nose, and probably played a role in the film being turned down so many times during development.
Isn't he a dreamboat?
Having Lorean realise that something was up and stopping things was probably the thing that removed the lingering ick factor.
But when I kiss you, it's like I'm kissing my brother.
I mean, if you'd seen Time Rider, going full ick doesn't always wash with most people. Apart from my cousin Ted. Oh God, he's such a dork. Marty's sister Linda and brother Dave were played by Wendy Jo Sperber and Mark McClure respectively. They were two characters who in the end did not get erased from history, but would be more or less erased from the sequels.
I want to know who's going to pay for this. I spilled beer all over when that car smashed into me.
Then there was the bully, Biff. Thomas F. Wilson was nothing like the character that he's best known for, unless of course you're big on Wing Commander games and you've never seen Back to the Future.
What are you looking at, butthead?
Biff is the biggest, baddest, and quite frankly, dumbest son of a bitch in Hill Valley. He's thicker than a cement milkshake.
So why don't you make like a tree and get out of here.
And it's such a great performance that you still like him despite how horrible Biff is. One of his cronies was played by Billy Zane, and character actor James Tolkien was the school disciplinarian Strickland.
You've got a real attitude problem, McFly. You're a slacker.
Christopher Lloyd had considered himself a serious actor who didn't initially want to read the script for Back to the Future because he'd rather appear in a play.
One more word out of you, big booty!
He'd done a mix of comedic and serious work with a few guest starring roles as villains, but he was still best known for his memorable turn playing Reverend Jim Ignatowski on the sitcom Taxi. Some people might tell you to watch Taxi for Andy Kaufman, and sure, that's a choice, but Taxi was a sitcom full of great characters, including Jim.
21 gigawatts!
Lloyd eventually accepted the role and gave us one of the great comedic scientist characters.
And you must not leave this house. You must not see anybody or talk to anybody.
On set, Christopher Lloyd tended to keep to himself, where he didn't really get to know his co-star until the sequels, though as Emmett Brown, his performance is just big enough without ever seeming to be over the top.
They wanted me to build them a bomb, so I took their plutonium and in turn gave them a shiny bomb casing full of used pinball machine parts.
Doc Brown in the 80s is rather cynical, while his 50s self just sees all these possibilities swimming about in his head.
Radiations. Of course. Because of all the fallout from the atomic wars.
Then there was the lead role, and that's a whole very long story that will subsume the next few minutes of your life. One of the earliest contenders was Michael J. Fox, who'd recently hit the big time by starring in the hit sitcom Family Ties. Steven Spielberg happened to be friends with the creator and executive producer of that show, Gary David Goldberg, where the TV producer was unwilling to give up the star of his series for several months. When Family Ties shut down for a few weeks, Fox filled the gap by taking on the title role in a low-budget comedy, Teen Wolf, his first starring role in a feature film. That is a film that, for some, is the definitive 80s Michael J. Fox film that did not involve nearly hooking up with a relative. At the time, Michael J. Fox had no idea that he'd even been under consideration for the lead role in a film produced by Steven Spielberg. But he was tied to the sitcom, and so the producers kept searching. As the film had been greenlit on the condition of making a summer release, they needed a Marty McFly like yesterday. Somebody suggested using the DeLorean to go back to yesterday to get a Marty, but then the van from the nearby asylum rocked up to collect the escaped patient, and so the production had to go back to their original plan and actual casting process. They looked at everyone, but time was short. Universal executive Sid Sheinberg suggested Eric Stoltz, and with no other Martyable actors available, Stoltz was cast as Marty McFly. Sheinberg even suggested that if the actor didn't work out, the Bobs would be able to recast and reshoot. But, that'll never happen. Eric Stoltz had time to prepare for the role and really thought about what Marty would be going through. His method was to go method, going so far as to tell people to call him Marty on and off screen. Filming commenced and would continue for a few weeks without too many dramas. However, after a few weeks, the two Bobs would watch the dailies with concern. They just weren't getting the laughs that they had expected. Eric Stoltz was playing Marty as a brooding figure who was filled with an internalized existential dread. Now, that might be great for a film about troops on their way to D-Day or somebody who can't make their mind up about what to order at the drive-thru. I mean, just get the goddamn Happy Meal. But brooding wasn't great for a gentle summer comedy. This Marty was killing the comedy, a real Marty pooper. Filming continued, but behind the scenes, things were happening. The two Bobs were in agreement and got Universal to agree to recast Marty, which would mean the schedule would have to be extended and any scene with Marty in shot would need to be refilmed. The caveat was they still had to make the same release date. There was only really one choice for a do-over Marty. The production went back to Gary David Goldberg and begged, and a deal was worked out. If Fox was amenable, the film could use Michael J. Fox on the proviso that Family Ties' production schedule wasn't affected. Goldberg gave Fox the script and told him to read it, and if he liked the movie and was prepared to do both jobs at the same time, he could. Michael J. Fox picked up the envelope with the script, weighed it, and said, "Yep, best thing he's ever read, do it." Deals were done extraordinarily quickly over a week or two, and it was only after Michael J. Fox had signed that the Bobs had to have the difficult conversation with their soon-to-be former leading man. Back to the Future had a very short production break, with Michael J. Fox starting shooting his role early in 1985.
Roll 'em.
Fox still had to work on 9 episodes of Family Ties, so during those weeks, Fox would be at Paramount during the day and then was whisked off to wherever the film was shooting. For weeks, Back to the Future's cast and crew worked nights, either shooting nighttime scenes or interiors. And you thought landing a proper acting gig is supposed to get you away from shift work. When Family Ties eventually wrapped for the season, the film's schedules flipped back to regular hours. Look, I dig. I once had to work 2 jobs that complemented each other very well. During the day, I sold motorcycles, while at night, I drove an ambulance. But having someone work on a sitcom during the day and making a movie the rest of the time, now that is commitment, that is energy. Meanwhile, I fall asleep every time I'm supposed to demonstrate a mattress to a customer at Beds, and More Beds, the nation's 45th largest chain of bedding retailers. Hang on, wasn't I just driving an ambulance?
Damn.
Michael J. Fox would catch up on his sleep in the car. Of course, he wasn't driving. Well, if he was, he wouldn't be for long. And he would have Sundays off to recuperate. Michael J. Fox didn't have the time to prepare for the role as Stoltz had done, and as such, he played the role based on his instincts. You could read Marty's face and know everything that was going through his mind. The only thing going through my mind most of the time is creating a tiered list ranking pancakes, waffles, crepes, pikelets, and poffages.
Doc, are you trying to tell me that my mother has got the hots for me?
While Robert Zemeckis was instantly relieved and amazed at how perfect Michael J. Fox was as Marty,
Everything is great.
some of the cast took a little longer to warm up to him. Perhaps getting tattoos of Eric Stoltz at the start of production was just a bit unwise. There was one other casualty of the recasting. Michael J. Fox is, well, he's a little short to be a stormtrooper, and apparently people didn't buy him having a tall girlfriend. Melora Hardin had originally been cast as Marty's 1985 girlfriend Jennifer, but when Eric Stoltz was asked to hand in his puffy vest and camcorder, Hardin was also let go in favour of Claudia Wells, who was also too short to be a stormtrooper, but not so short that she would get a callback as an Oompa Loompa.
Sounds pretty heavy.
Why are things so heavy in the future? Is there a problem with the Earth's gravitational pull?
It was originally hoped that they could reuse any establishing shots or cutaways to other actors that didn't show Marty in shot, though much of the time that would also need to be reshot. Like Stoltz before him, Fox had gotten lessons from a guitar teacher on how to play Johnny B. Goode, and worked with a choreographer to show off the moves from his character's guitar heroes.
Look at me. I'm an old man.
The rest of the production would go relatively smoothly, though there would be a mad rush to get the film finished for its summer release date.
My name is Darth Vader. I am an extraterrestrial from the planet Vulcan.
An early sneak preview went so well that Universal pushed the film's release date from August to the July 4th weekend. No pressure.
Wait, cut.
Except, yeah, that added a lot more pressure. It would be a matter of weeks from the end of filming to the film's actual release. Industrial Light and Magic worked on the effects for Back to the Future, though what ended up being the first film in the trilogy was relatively light on major effects. There's one other major element to the film. It's a special effect, it's a prop, or it's a star of the film in its own right. Doc Brown's Time Machine. Even before Back to the Future, the DeLorean was a car with a history. John DeLorean, who the car was named after and not the other way around, was a star executive and engineer at General Motors who left to set up his own company, one that would bear his name, John Cars, though it's perhaps better known as the DeLorean Motor Company. He set up a factory in Northern Ireland where his employees built a futuristic-looking stainless steel sports car. The DMC DeLorean was first released in 1981. It featured a rear-mounted V6 engine, 2 seats, had gull-wing doors, and even without a flux capacitor and Mr. Fusion, it looked the business. However, only around 9,000 units were produced in the 2 years before production ceased, and by the time of Back to the Future, the car was a bit of a punchline. However, a car that didn't sell well enough at the time would become a classic, thanks in large part to its association with Back to the Future. The production grabbed a few DeLoreans and built one hero car, one for stunts, and one to be cut up to be used for interior process shots. So if you found yourself with a DeLorean, would you keep it stock, or would you have it kitted out to look like one from the film? And then of course there's the choice, which version from which film? The customized DeLoreans looked great on screen, though they didn't necessarily drive all that well, and the interior gubbins were placed in such a way that doing almost anything in the driver's seat would lead to cuts and bruises.
We're sending you back to the future.
Back to the Future is a film with a lot of product placement, from era-appropriate livery for the gas station to soft drinks, but of course one of the things that the movie helped popularise, the camcorder. Before, home video recorders and cameras were separate devices linked by a cable. JVC's GRC1 could record and playback video using a new compact cassette that you could put into an adapter and then play back the tape in a standard VHS VCR.
It's truly amazing. A portable television studio.
Meanwhile, I would never ever stoop to product placement on this channel.
I just don't think I can take that kind of rejection.
The rest of the film looked great as well. There's a real contrast between Hill Valley of 1985 and 1955, with the 50s version always being made to look a little warmer on screen. We see so many comments on other videos from people who insist that the decade that they were kids in was the best and everything else sucks. 80s kids were not immune to such thoughts, and also conveniently forgot about the threat of nuclear Armageddon. But the irony is that one of the most beloved movies of the 80s treats 1985 as if it's a shithole.
Go to it, kid.
The music by Alan Silvestri is the frosting on top of the giant donut. His Back to the Future score utilised a full orchestra at a time when more and more movies had synthesised scores or used pop songs on the soundtrack. Somebody recently noticed that Alan Silvestri had quoted his own music from work he'd done on the television series Chips. It's not technically theft if you borrow from yourself, and then it probably happens way more often than you'd think.
So let's just keep this brain-melting stuff to ourselves, okay? Oh, yeah.
Alan Silvestri's score is memorable in its own right, but there's plenty of diegetic music. There's the school dance band, Marty auditioning with the Pinheads, as well as some songs from Huey Lewis and the News.
I'm afraid you're just too darn loud.
Back to the Future opened in July of 1985 and did very well, and then kept doing very well. And then weeks later was still doing very well, to the point where it was getting really boring for most people whose job it was to report on box office stats. It would be the biggest film of the year, and almost immediately there was of course talk of a sequel. 2 sequels would be made back to back a few years later, and the film's legacy and influence on pop culture would eventually prove enormous. But of course that's a story for a separate video. Back to the Future had a great script that went to great pains in dotting every I and crossing every T, with dots added to the T and crossed I's just to make absolutely sure. It was funny and heartfelt, and unlike so many 80s comedies, hasn't dated horribly, just so long as you skip the deleted scenes.
He's never stood up to Viv in his life! Ever! No, why? What's the matter?
The ending, where Marty's life in 1985 is now one of confidence and wealth, does seem like a very 80s way to portray happiness. That and a really badly parked pickup truck. But then again, no one once calls him Chicken. We are now further away from 1985 than it was to 1955, where we're actually closer to the 100th anniversary of Doc Brown's vision of the flux capacitor. Son of a gun.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.